Hello, this is Hart Hagen with the Climate Report, live at 5. So, what I wanted to talk about with you today is Climate, the Untold Story. What is the prevailing narrative about climate change? And then, what is something that is closer to the truth? So, it's Climate, the Untold Story, and then 6 things they never talk about but should. We're going to talk about an article in the New York Times today, and I'll get to that. But before I get to the article, I wanted to show you what, let me just show you this document. So this document is a Google document that I wrote up. It's called Climate, the Untold Story, What We're Not Told About Climate Change. I'm going to blow this up just a little bit higher. Yeah. So here are 6 things that I want you to know about climate change. And this is, in contrast to the prevailing narrative. Number 1, carbon is only part of the picture. Number 2, water cools. It's not just about carbon, water cools things down. Number 3, plants cool things down. It's not just about carbon, it's what we do to the land. Number 4, plants make a sponge if we will let them, and we very much need to let plants make a sponge. Not only do plants themselves make a sponge, but also plants make good soil, and that soil becomes a sponge for rainfall, rainfall being fresh water. Most of the water on the planet is salt water, but the only water that you and I and most animals and plants can consume is fresh water. We have declining fresh water. We need to stop the decline of fresh water with plants. Number 5, when I want to critique this idea of let's get off fossil fuels. Sounds like a nice idea, but who has the plan for that? And if there is no plan for getting off of fossil fuels, then what should we do as an alternative plan? Number 6, carbon rises with the economy. It's just item number 6 on what they don't talk about but should is that carbon emissions go up as the economy goes up, and nobody's talking about anything but a growing economy. As long as the economy is growing, carbon emissions will go up, and we'll talk about that. Number 7 here, I want to talk about solutions from a biophysical standpoint, as opposed to what? As opposed to solutions from a political standpoint. In other words, what can or should we do collectively? And then I have a conclusion, and then I want to talk about something, some resources to give you something more to think about, such as people who talk about energy blindness and people who talk about when the economy goes up, so do carbon emissions, and so does energy, and so do materials, and so does electricity, and so does complexity. All these things go up proportionately to the economy. So I'm going to come back and go through all this, but I wanted to give you an overview of what we will talk about at the same time as we talk about this article from the New York Times. And let me go ahead and get to that article, which is as follows. It says, I'll go back up to the top of the article. It says, it's an opinion, guest essay. We don't see what climate change is doing to us. So let me share with you why we're going to talk about this article. We're going to talk about this article because this article is a good example of somebody who is otherwise informed, but has a prevailing view, a dominant view, has bought into the dominant narrative about what climate change is all about. And I want to critique, I want to give him credit where credit is due, because he's somebody who is really knowledgeable in his field and brings good information, but also implicitly just reinforces what I consider to be a false narrative. So let's see what he has to say. It says, we don't see what climate change is doing to us. And this is a Mr. Park. Let me go down here real quick and find out what Mr. Park's name and credentials are. He is R. Jisung Park is an environmental and labor economist and assistant professor at the University of Pennsylvania and author of Slow Burn: The Hidden Costs of a Warming World. Now, the world is warming, but not for the reasons that we are told. Yes, carbon dioxide is a problem. Yes, carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. Yes, carbon dioxide has the effect of warming the planet, but it's not the only cause of warming. And in my view, not the primary cause of warming. And also, I don't think global warming is the primary environmental problem we have to deal with. I think the primary environmental problem we have to deal with is the extinction of species. Let me just click out of this a minute and talk to you about that. So to me, the primary environmental problem we have to deal with is the extinction of species. Now, the following, Nate Hagens says this. I'll tell you more about Nate Hagens, but Nate Hagens says that in his lifetime, I gather he's in his mid-50s. So we're talking about, let's go back to 1970. And we're going to say that since 1970, in the last 50 years, 70% of the following have declined, and 70%. So insects have declined by 70%. Mammals, land mammals have declined by 70%, and fishes have declined by 70% in the last 50 years. If you look at a curve, see if I can do this right. If you look at a curve, this curve, it's like starts several hundred years ago, and then in the last century, and then this century, that curve is just going straight to the ground. Insects populations are going straight to the ground. Fishes, large fish, especially large fishes in the ocean, are going straight to the ground. Mammals on land are going straight to the ground, and birds are going straight to the ground. To me, this is a much more urgent and easy to understand crisis than climate change or global warming. But back to Mr. Park's article. So he says, what don't we see? We don't see what climate change is doing to us. So his main point here is that, well, let's just read it and see. Many of us realize climate change is a threat to our well-being, but what we have not yet grasped is that the devastation wreaked by climate change is often just as much about headline-grabbing catastrophes as it is about the subtler accumulation of innumerable, slow, and unequal burns that are already underway. The nearly invisible costs that may not raise the same alarm, but that in their pervasiveness and inequality may be much more harmful than commonly realized. Now, let me go to the next paragraph. No, I don't want that paragraph. I'm going to go on down. It says, in some highly exposed and physically demanding industries like mining, a day in the 90s can increase injury risk by over 65% relative to a day in the 60s. So when it's hotter, there's more risk of injury because of heat stroke and because mentally people are not all there. They get careless and they get injured. It says, while some of these incidents involve clear cases of heat illness, my colleagues and I have found that a vast majority appear to come from ostensibly unrelated accidents, like a construction worker falling off a ladder or a manufacturing worker mishandling hazardous machinery. So, when it gets warm, you can't quite think as well as you can. Plus, you're uncomfortable. You're thinking about how uncomfortable you are, but the cognitive ability declines, and this causes workplace injuries. Let's go on down and see what else he has to say. A growing body of literature links temperature to cognitive performance and decision making. Research shows that hotter days lead to more mistakes, including among professional athletes, more local crime, more violence in prisons, etc., and also more profanity on social media. So people are getting more agitated when it's hotter outside. And so I'm not saying that these things aren't happening. I am saying two things. One is the source of the warming is not only carbon dioxide. The source of the warming is hot plates. A couple of things related to land. One is those portions of the land that are hot plates, such as pavement and concrete, such as bare dirt crop fields, such as bare sand in the desert. So the crop fields that are just bare dirt, there's no cover crop there, and that causes it to get quite a bit hotter. There can be tens of degrees Fahrenheit difference in the temperature, in the surface temperature, between bare dirt and anything that's covered with plant matter. Same in a desert. You have these vast stretches of desert that have been first ruined by humans and subsequently neglected by humans. We could restore deserts to the grasslands that they once were. We could restore our deserts. Some of our deserts used to be grasslands. Some of our deserts used to be forests. They have been denuded. They have been plowed and then abandoned. And some of our deserts are, well, all of them could be restored. Many of our deserts could be restored using livestock. Other of our deserts can be restored using some form of regenerative agriculture, some form of plant matter, but almost all of our deserts they don't have enough animals. That's another conversation. I'm just saying there are a whole lot of hot plates in this world that they're hot because they're bare. It's bare sand or bare dirt. And then there are other hot plates that are concrete or pavement where there's no attempt been made to make it shady with trees or otherwise. Moving along. It says, children are not immune to these trends whereby heat causes lower performance and more suffering. Children are not immune. In research using over 4 million student test scores from New York City, I found that from 1999 to 2011, students who took their high school Regents exams on a 90-degree day were 10% less likely to pass their subjects relative to a day in the 60s. Now, that doesn't mean they're outdoors in 90-degree weather taking a test. It does mean that they're indoors in air conditioning, but the outdoor weather causes a certain decline in cognitive functioning. And also, maybe they had to spend the night in a home that did not have air conditioning in it. So, and he says, and that's just heat. So he's been analyzing what heat does to workplace injuries, what heat does to test scores, etc. And he says here, researchers are bringing to light the more subtle yet cumulatively damaging effects of increased wildfires and other natural disasters. The hidden consequences of wildfire smoke may even cut deeper than the more visible death and destruction caused by the flames. Let's talk for a minute about wildfires. So he's talking like wildfires are caused by climate change. Wildfires, flooding, drought, and heat waves are four things that are blamed on climate change, which we are to understand is CO2. Climate change caused by CO2, caused by excess burning of fossil fuels. We're not going to talk about how climate change might be caused by other factors. We're not going to talk about how CO2 might be caused by other factors. By other factors causing CO2, I mean, much of the CO2 has been released from the ground. We've been releasing CO2 into the atmosphere for millennia. It's accelerating. We've done more now in the last 100 years than we did prior to that. But we have been releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere for millennia. By the way, if you're listening live, I invite you to put in a comment so I can respond to it. So, but he's talking about wildfires here. So the conventional wisdom says that burning fossil fuels caused excess CO2. Excess CO2 causes more warming. Excess warming causes more drying of the forests, so they're more flammable. Well, is excess CO2 causing the warming? That's one question. And is the warming causing the drying? So I would argue that forests are dry because they have been over-harvested. You have timber roads going through them. The timber roads degrade the biological diversity, they degrade the plant matter, they degrade the fungi, all of the things that go together to make a mature forest. There's no forest that is more resistant to wildfire than an old growth or mature forest. But if you've always getting in there, if you're always degrading the forest, then a degraded forest is going to be more flammable. One example of a degraded forest is you might see a bunch of trees, but those trees are 25 to 50 years old. They're 25 to 50 years old because 25 to 50 years ago, somebody cut down the entire forest. Most timber harvested today is done in the form of clear cuts. They're harvesting it for timber, they're harvesting it for paper, they're harvesting it for biomass energy, which means you take trees, cut them down, take the wood chips and turn them into wood pellets, and then you ship them across the Atlantic Ocean to burn in England or other places. But we're clear cutting the forests, and you clear cut it, and then you plant pine trees, and then let them grow for 50 years, and then, oh, we're going to cut down more pine trees for timber or for whatever wood products were. Now that 50-year-old pine plantation, even before you cut it down, that 50-year-old pine plantation is a degraded forest, biologically and otherwise. It's also a more flammable forest. They talk like they need to go in there. The term fuel reduction is a big term of art. They want us to think that if you go in and you remove the brush and you remove the small trees, that they're reducing the fuel so there's less to burn in a wildfire. My sources, including Anastasia Makareva, say that Anastasia Makareva, she is a prestigious scientist who has very much of an advocate for keeping our forests today. But she's saying that mature forests are the most resistant to wildfire because the mature forest has a lot of organic matter in it. You have the leaves on the trees are allowed to fall. You have the trees are allowed to die. The tree falls over in it, and those leaves on the ground absorb rainfall. The dead wood dries out over the course of time, so that when it does rain, that dead wood absorbs rainfall. And if you ever go through a forest, if it has rained in the last several months, that wood is still going to be somewhat wet, especially on the inside. It's holding a lot of water. Leaves on the ground hold a lot of water. Plus, the leaves on the ground absorb the rainfall so that there's less flooding, and so that when the leaves absorb the rainfall, they let it gently soak into the ground, and that means there's more water in the soil, and that helps plants grow, that helps plants be greener, and therefore it's a virtuous cycle. The plants are greener, the plants are holding more water, therefore there's less, they're less flammable. But I digress. Let's get back to the article. So it says here, it's talking about all the things. He's talking about the consequences of heat. And he says, and heat is not the only thing that causes consequences. You have consequences from wildfire smoke. The smoke from people breathe in the smoke of wildfire. The Canada forests burned this summer, and all along, much of the northern and eastern United States, and even where I am in Kentucky in the Mid-South, it was not the Mid-South, but it's kind of like it's close to the Midwest and the Upper South. So there were wildfires in Canada this summer, and it caused a lot of, the air quality went down. So there are health consequences when the air quality goes down. All this is very true, but what caused the wildfire to begin with? And it's not CO2 alone. And in my view, it's not primarily CO2. They're just wanting to shift the blame onto something else. That's no discredit to Mr. Park, the author of this article, but he's just like anybody. He's buying into into a false narrative about what climate change is, what it comes from, and what are the solutions to climate change. So let's go on down. I want to show you one more thing here, and that is this was interesting here. Recent research indicates that how temperature affects human health depends greatly on the adaptations that happen to be at play locally. For instance, a day above 85 degrees in the coldest U.S. zip codes so where are the coldest U.S. zip codes? If of course, it includes Alaska, but in the northern, places like North Dakota, Montana, parts of Michigan are going to be among, especially North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, are going to be some of the coldest zip codes on the mainland U.S. And then the warmest zip codes in the U.S., apart from Hawaii, are going to be like, Florida, Texas, Arizona, along the south like that. So the coldest zip codes, a day above 85 degrees in the coldest U.S. zip codes has nearly 10 times the effect on elderly mortality relative to the warmest zip codes. In other words, a string of such days in a place like Seattle will lead to a much higher increase in the mortality rate than in a place like Houston, even though both places have similar income levels. So I'm going to go down to the last paragraph here. And here's where he's kind of summing it up. And you have to understand that this is a New York Times article. You have to understand what is the true nature of the New York Times and what is the nature of the people who are writing for it. They're there to support a certain narrative. They are there consciously or not. 99% of the time it's not conscious at all, but they are there to support a narrative that is not threatening to the ruling classes. Because, it's like Henry Adams said, the press is the hired agent of a moneyed system and set up for no other purpose than to tell lies where their interests are involved. One should trust nobody and nothing. Doesn't mean you can't get a lot of good information here. I've been giving you a lot of good information. I've been singing the praises of this scholar who has a lot to say about the disparate impacts of climate change based on the disparate impacts of heat and how it, in an unequal manner, affects students, workers, the elderly, and others. So it says here, climate change is a complex phenomenon whose ultimate costs will depend not only on how quickly we transition away from fossil fuels, but also on how well we adapt our social and economic systems to the warming that we have in store. In other words, we need to curb climate change. We need to lower temperatures. And as far as he knows, the only way we can do that is to transition off of fossil fuels. Well, disagree strenuously as to whether that's the only way to cool temperatures. So let's talk about that just a minute. Is lowering carbon emissions the only way to lower temperatures? I submit to you that it is not the only way, or the best way, or the quickest way, or the safest way, or the cleanest way to lower temperatures. The best way to lower temperatures is to increase plant cover. The best way to, walk under a shade tree and compare the temperature under the shade tree to the temperature outside that shade tree, or get one of those laser thermometers and go out into a field where there's bare dirt, shine on a hot day, shine it down. That bare dirt, the temperature is easily going to be over 100 degrees. The surface temperature of that dirt is easily going to be over 100 degrees. Meanwhile, a place not far away that has some plants, or maybe the forest, tens of degrees Fahrenheit less surface temperatures. So those surface temperatures are an untold story in climate change. It also says here, let me get back to the article. So climate change is a complex phenomenon whose ultimate cost will depend not only on how quickly we transition away from fossil fuels, but also how well we adapt our social and economic systems to the warming we have in store. A proactive stance toward adaptation and resilience may be useful from the standpoint of safeguarding one's own physical and financial security, whether as a homeowner or the head of a Fortune 500 company. So there are at least two main issues in climate change. One is how to slow or reverse climate change. And the mainstream narrative is all about lowering our carbon emissions so as to lower the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I'm saying if we have more plants in our forests, more plants in our landscapes, more plants in our deserts, more plants in our agricultural fields, we will cool the climate more quickly, not only because our surface temperatures are going to come down to something that's more manageable, but also because when you have plants, especially if it's in a high functioning, for any plants anywhere are going to transpire water. Plants cause evaporation. That evaporation causes a cooling effect, and then goes up into the clouds. It condenses a little bit to form a cloud, and then that condensation up in the cloud layer causes some of the heat of the earth to radiate back out into space. Why is that important? Because we have warming because of a greenhouse effect, but greenhouse gases are not the only cause of the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is this: more incoming energy than outgoing energy. There's always incoming energy from the sun, and there's always outgoing energy because it radiates out into space. And then there's incoming energy, and then there's, what is that incoming sunlight hitting? Is it hitting a plant, which is a solar-powered air conditioner? Or is it hitting a hot surface that's just going to heat up and cause more heat to get trapped down here in the atmosphere? So you've got incoming heat. How much incoming heat do you have? That's partly a function of greenhouse gases. At least how much heat gets trapped here is partly a function of greenhouse gases. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, but also water is a greenhouse gas. We have ever more water in the atmosphere. The amount of water in the atmosphere is more than it used to be. So we need to think, how can we free some of that water from the atmosphere? Plants have an important role to play in freeing some of that water in the atmosphere. We can draw down some of the water so that it's less of a greenhouse gas. So let me go to the other document that I wanted to share with you, which is my, go ahead, present, share screen, climate, the untold story. So this is what I want you to know. I don't want to just critique an article and not give you anything. Change my screen just a little bit. I'm not going to just critique an article but not give you an alternative way of thinking about things. So here it is. I'm going to read through the document and then talk about it. Climate, the untold story. What we are not told about climate change. And I summarized this before. Let me summarize it again real quick, and then I'll come back up to the top. And carbon is only part of the picture. That, number one. Number two, water cools things down. Water cycles cool things down. Number three, plants cool things down. Number four, plants make a sponge to capture rainfall to get more fresh water. We need more fresh water for lots of reasons. Number five, I'm going to critique this idea of let's just get off fossil fuels. Number six, carbon rises with the economy. So the point here is that these are some things that you never hear about. I tried to pick the top 6 things that you almost never hear about from the prevailing climate narrative. So number one, carbon is only part of the picture because water cools things down. Carbon is not the only thing that heats things up. Finagling, trying to control the amount of carbon in the atmosphere is not the only lever we have. It's not the only option we have as far as how we cool things down. If we want to cool things down, we will employ water and water cycles. Item B, land matters. How we treat the land matters. It's not just about what's in the atmosphere, it's about what is on the land and what we are doing to the land that controls the temperatures. Item C, extinction happens with or without climate change. So they almost never, all this hand-wringing and fussing and fighting over climate change, what they almost never do is talk about extinction. It's like that. Since 1970, we've lost 70% of insects, 70% of land mammals, 70% of fishes, and 70% of birds. We've lost 70%. If you look at it on a curve, on a graph, that is a line that is going straight toward the ground. That is much more catastrophic than climate change, and you have to wonder, why aren't they talking about this? Item number two in the 6 things that 6 parts of the untold story, 6 things they never tell you about. Item number 2 is that water cools. Water cycles cool. Evaporating water cools. Step out of the shower or the bath or the pool. It feels cold because water is evaporating. Walk under a shade tree, same thing. It feels cool because water is evaporating. Go out in the sun on a hot day or work up a sweat. It feels cooler when you sweat because sweat, when it gets onto your skin and starts evaporating, it's evaporating water. When water evaporates, it cools things down. Why don't we employ and utilize and harness and leverage the power of evaporating water? It's a mystery. If we want to harness the power of evaporating water, we'll go to plants. So number 3, plants cool things down. If you want to know the quickest, cleanest, safest way to cool the temperatures in the world, plants cool things down. At the bottom, I have a video that I want you to watch. Let me just go ahead and tell you what that video is. If you do nothing else with the information I'm giving you, watch the video, How Plants Cool the Planet by Jimmy Eisenstein. That is misspelled there. Eisenstein, Eisenstein. Jimmy Eisenstein, How Plants Cool the Planet. It's a video. It's a 5-minute video. It's jam-packed with compelling illustrations and very well narrated and well researched. So I want you to see Jimmy Eisenstein video, How Plants Cool the Planet. So item number 3 of things that constitute the untold story about climate change is plants cool things down. They do this by casting shade. They do this by driving evaporation. They do this by causing cloud formation. They do this by facilitating precipitation. All of these things cool things down, as opposed to what? If you don't have plants, you have hot surfaces. Hot surfaces heat things up. Plants cover the hot surfaces with shade and they cool things down, whether you're talking about restore a desert to a grassland that it once was. Use cover crops in your bare crop field, and try to have more trees and less pavement in our developed areas. Number 4 thing that they never talk about when they're talking about climate change is that plants make a sponge. We need more plants because plants make the landscape into a sponge. Why do we need a sponge? Let's talk about this. Let's deal with this. So we need plants to be a sponge because we're losing fresh water. We need to regain the fresh water that we've lost. Why are plants a sponge? Because when it rains, the rain sticks to the leaves of the trees. The rain also sticks to the organic matter that is underneath the trees, and the rain is absorbed by by good soil. Plants make good soil. When you have plants with roots in the ground, they're making good soil. They're jump-starting the soil food web. They're adding lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of carbon into the ground. Carbon is the main component of soil organic matter, and soil that has high amounts of soil organic matter can absorb monumental amounts of rain, whereas soil that is low in organic matter is going to slough off the rain. You're going to lose that rain. Poor soil, and poor soil means organic matter of 1% or less. Good soil has organic matter of 5% or more. Some soil, there are farmers in the US who have taken the soil that used to be 1 or 2% organic matter and changed it into 10 or 11% organic matter. That is soil that is going to absorb the rainfall. If nothing else, good soil absorbs rainfall. It does so much else, but good soil absorbs the rainfall. We need to absorb the rainfall because we are losing fresh water, and it's a vicious cycle. We lose fresh water due to evaporation and due to excess runoff, aka flooding. But we lose all that water because our soil is poor and because we don't have much vegetation on the landscape, and then so we lose the water, and then a dry landscape, plants can't grow very well in a dry landscape, and then the landscape dies even more, and you lose more organic matter from the soil, and then it's just a vicious cycle: drying out, flooding, drought, desertification, less and less and less fresh water. So let's talk about the next thing that they never talk about when it comes to climate change. Here, I'm going through all the things that they never talk about it. Yes, I use the word they. Fill in the blank however you want. They means the people that are driving this conversation. But I digress. So, item number 5, I wanted to critique the idea of let's get off fossil fuels, as if they have a plan for getting off fossil fuels. Here's a problem. Nobody has a plan for reducing fossil fuels. We could, but the pundits and the talking heads and even the scientists who are recommending that we lower our carbon emissions don't have a plan for getting off fossil fuels. I say this because insofar as you're depending on solar or wind or electric vehicles to get off fossil fuels, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because solar requires fossil fuels. Wind power requires fossil fuels. And, electric vehicles require fossil fuels. And so, that's another conversation. But if you want to know how much fossil fuel is used for a solar panel, look at the price of the solar panel, the price of the transportation, the price that's paid for mining, etc. If you want to know how much, because fossil fuels are directly correlated with money. If you want to know how much fossil fuel is being burned, look at how many dollars are being spent, because fossil fuels are directly correlated 100%, 99, 100% correlation with money. And we'll get to that in a minute. Let's just go ahead and talk about that. Carbon rises with the economy. So I'm going to talk about this. Let's deal with this. So I'm going to refer you to some resources at the end. Nate Hagens, Simon Michaud, and Tom Murphy are 3 people who deal with some form of the issue of energy blindness. We are blind to the extent to which energy is central to our economy, such as it is. I'm not saying it should be that way. I'm saying it is that way. So Tom Murphy, Nate Hagens, Simon Michaud will tell you the following, that money is GDP. GDP is kind of a measure of the amount of money that is changing hands in the economy. So you have, when GDP goes up by 3%, then fossil fuels go up by 3%. When GDP and fossil fuels go up by 3%, then the amount of materials throughput, the materials flowing through the economy, the total quantity of the output of all goods, it goes up proportionately. So money and GDP and energy and fossil fuels and materials throughput and electricity and complexity, all these things, like 6 or 7 things, are almost perfectly correlated in the economy, such as it is. That's beyond the scope of this talk, but I'm saying that if this is true, then every time the economy grows, that is an increase in the amount of fossil fuels we use. Now, the people who are wanting to transition to so-called renewable energy, they want us to think that there's going to be a decoupling of fossil fuels from GDP. They want us to think that we can grow our economy 3% a year without growing fossil fuels 3% a year. That's just not possible in the economy that we have, and there's no decoupling that has been demonstrated to work on a large scale or in the long term. Why? Because renewable energy, so-called renewable energy, requires fossil fuels. The sun is a renewable resource, but a solar panel is at best, a rebuildable resource. It has to be built and then it has to be rebuilt about every 25 years. The wind, you had put up a wind turbine. The wind is a renewable resource, but that wind turbine has to be built and then rebuilt about every 25 years. There's a whole worldwide supply chain that is dedicated to solar and wind. There's a worldwide supply chain dedicated to mining the minerals, processing the minerals, smelting the minerals, transporting the minerals, assembling the component parts, shipping the component parts to a factory, where the solar panel is assembled, or in the case of a wind turbine, shipping in parts from all over to build that wind turbine in a place, on land or in the ocean. There's a worldwide supply chain dedicated to that. There's nothing about that supply chain that is clean, green, or renewable. That wind turbine is rebuildable, not renewable. The solar panel is rebuildable, not renewable. So that's all I have to say about that. Let's see what else we were wanting to say here. So here's what I've been saying the last 5 minutes or so. Number 6, carbon rises with the economy. As the economy grows, so do the fossil fuels, so does the carbon dioxide, so does the materials throughput. The materials throughput is like every good, everything that's tangible or physical, like this phone, like this legal pad here, everything that's tangible or physical, you have to extract it from somewhere. It's from some combination of mining and agriculture, with agriculture including forestry. So the materials throughput is the total amount of materials that are coming to us in the form of finished goods or being extruded in the form of pollution. But the materials throughput is the total amount of materials flowing through the economy. The materials throughput increases as the economy increases. In fact, Nate Hagen says that's a 100% correlation, not a 99% correlation as with energy and GDP, but a 100% correlation of GDP with materials throughput. So here's another thing about that. Now, let's talk about this. So if you grow the economy by 3% per year, then that economy grows, the rule of 72, if you're familiar with the rule of 72. So an economy that's growing at a rate of 3% per year, take 72 divided by 3, and it turns out to be 24. It's going to double every 24 years. An economy that's growing every 2% a year is going to double every 36 years. 72 divided by 2 is 36. So if you have an economy that's growing at 2 or 3% per year, then that economy is going to double every 24 to 36 years. So 24 years from now, twice as much economy as we have now. Add another 24 years, twice as much as that, and then double again. And here's another stat that's kind of related, just not quite in as round of figures. If you grow the economy at 2.33% per year, then that economy multiplies by a factor of 10 every 100 years. So add a 0 every 100 years. Add 2 zeros every 200 years, add 3 zeros every 300 years, 4 zeros every 400 years, 5 zeros every 500 years, 6 zeros every 600 years. So 600 years from now, the economy is going to be 1,000,000 times higher than it is now. 900 years from now, the economy is going to be 1,000,000,000 times what it is now. 1,000 years from now, the economy is going to be 10 billion times what it is now. How long can that go on? And yet, nobody's talking about this. This is thanks to Tom Murphy for this concept. I highly recommend Tom Murphy. There are multiple Tom Murphys. This Tom Murphy is UC San Diego, University of California, San Diego, and his blog, which I highly recommend, is called Do the Math. But Tom Murphy is a physicist. He's an astrophysicist. He's a rocket scientist. And he's from the perspective of a physicist, he is saying that as long as we continue to grow, to exponentially grow the energy in our economy, we're running up against hard limits. There's only so much we can grow, and yet we can't talk about anything but economic growth. So keep in mind, economic growth is perfectly correlated with energy consumption. And energy consumption is perfectly correlated with materials throughput, all of which is perfectly correlated with the amount of complexity or technology that we have. So anytime we want to use technology to solve our problems, that's an invitation. I mean, AI is a perfect example of this. When we apply technology to something, then it's an energy hungry solution. As long as we're putting energy hungry solutions, as long as we're utilizing energy hungry solutions, then we are marching toward this scenario where every 100 years you multiply everything by 10. And there are people who say, well, technology will solve that. Well, that's glib. It's not serious. It's deeply unserious to say that technology is going to solve that. For one thing, technology creates problems. It doesn't just solve problems. We need to look at how technology creates problems and not just how technology solves problems. So item number 6, let me go back up to the top and summarize just the big picture. This is climate, the untold story. This is what you are not hearing in the news. This is what you're not hearing from the United Nations. You're not hearing this from the Sierra Club. You're not hearing this from New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, Wall Street Journal. You're not hearing any of this. And so what you're not hearing is that, number one, carbon is only part of the picture. It's not the whole story. Number 2, water cools things down. If we want to cool the climate, let's get water in action. Let's get water into the mix. Item number 3, plants cool things off. If we really want to solve global warming, why can't we talk about using plants? Number 4, plants make a sponge. The sponge that is plants, they capture the water, they capture fresh water. It's a virtuous cycle of more plants, more water cycles, more evaporative cooling, such that we cool things off. The quickest, cleanest, safest way to cool the climate and your hometown is to utilize plants and water cycles. We're not doing that. We're not even talking about it. We're talking about it around the edges, but not having a serious conversation about this. Number 5, here's another thing we're not talking about. We're not talking about whether there is a serious proposal for getting off fossil fuels. I submit to you that there is not currently a serious proposal for getting off fossil fuels, because renewable energy doesn't do it. So-called renewable energy doesn't do it. And we're never going to get off fossil fuels as long as we're increasing our energy consumption. And we're always going to increase our energy consumption as long as we are growing the economy by even 2 or 3% per year. So that's about all I have. I think you get the idea. Appreciate you joining me today, and come back soon. I just want you to know, here's what I want you to know. I want you to know that the people and the institutions that claim to be serious, to have a serious analysis of climate change, do not have a serious analysis of climate change. The ones that claim to have serious solutions don't have serious solutions. If you want serious solutions, I want you to check out, and I'll show you this again. If you want serious solutions, I want you to check out these 3 people. That is item number 10 here. People to look up on the subject of energy blindness, people to look up on the subject of, a growing economy means growing energy. I want you to look up Nate Hagens on YouTube. His YouTube channel is called The Great Simplification. I want you to look up Tom Murphy of UC San Diego. His blog is called Do the Math. And I want you to look up Simon Michaud. Simon is an Australian by birth. He's currently in Finland. He has a PhD in mining engineering with a decade or more of experience in the industry. He is now a professor at the Geological Survey of Finland. And Simon Michaud is absolutely one of the few people I know who has rolled up his hands and said, let's find out how much materials we have even available for the so-called energy transition. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. Thanks and have a great day.